Between Games, supporting community sport, proudly brought to you by GippSport.
Welcome to the Between Games Sports podcast brought to you by GippSport. My name is Ryan Evans and it's my great pleasure to be in the saddle again for today's show. And I'm joined by my GippSport colleague, Michelle Harris. Welcome to you, Michelle.
Hi, Ryan. It's great to be here with you again as well.
Now, today's topic for discussion is gender equity in sport and the Change Our Game initiative. What's the link between sport and gender equity, you might say? Well, sport is one of the most powerful platforms for empowering women and girls and promoting gender equity. Traditionally, many of our sports clubs have been more male-orientated, but thankfully we are living in times where more women and girls are getting the opportunity to participate in sport through greater access to programs such as the Women's AFL football competitions and the construction of more female-friendly facilities. There still is, however, a power of work that needs to be done in this space to ensure that our sporting clubs are in fact equitable for men and women. This includes involving more women and girls in leadership and decision-making roles and applying a gender lens when planning and conducting events at a club. Michelle, I know that this topic is something that you're really passionate about. Before we move into this discussion, do you mind telling us a little bit about the roles that you've had in sport and what gender equity or gender inequity in sport means to you?
Absolutely. I've been lucky enough to be involved with community sport throughout my whole life, and I actually started volunteering at a very young age in a netball club, and actually started as a secretary in a state sporting association when I was 18. So I really have never felt the barrier of participating or volunteering on a sports committee board. I always thought it was something that I was capable and willing to do, and I believe I've had some really fantastic experiences as a result of that. And I've really seen that when clubs embrace women and a diverse culture within their boards, that it really has a positive flow-on effect in membership numbers and volunteering, and just really how much you enjoy being involved in that sport. So I think I've seen that it does work, and I love working with other women in key roles in sporting clubs as well. And I see this often in my paid work. I develop strategic plans with sporting clubs, and one of the things we often talk about is improving gender equality as a key action in their plan. And it's sometimes not something they're really proactively thought of. And of course, they always tell me they don't have enough volunteers. So, women are 50% of the population. So if they think outside the square about how they might be able to recruit and support more women on their committees, then they've got some extra volunteers, which is always a big help.
Yes.
And what about you, Evo?
Yeah, well, obviously work for GippSport like yourself, and as an organisation, we're really committed to improving gender equity. I know at the board level, we start with ensuring we have the 40% gender quota on the board. We have ongoing partnerships with organisations such as Gippsland Women's Health and the Gippsland Centre Against Sexual Assault to deliver initiatives such as the Orange Round, which is a round dedicated to promotion of gender equity within sports clubs and the prevention of men's violence against women. We're also responsible for the implementation of a range of Change Our Game initiatives, which you might be able to tell us a little bit more about.
So in late 2015, the Victorian government held an inquiry into the women and girls in sport and active recreation. There was a huge research project and there was lots of consultation undertaken. And as a result of that inquiry, the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation was formed. And one of the key initiatives of that has been to form the Change Our Game campaign. So there's a fantastic website that exists, and you can go on there and there's some really great resources. And thankfully, GippSport has received funding for a range of initiatives through this campaign, like you've mentioned. And it's really fantastic to see different levels of government, different departments of government really working together to rally the crew, I guess, all the different resources and different professionals to understand what the challenges are or the barriers to women in sport and active recreation, and how we can help them to prosper in the future. And as I mentioned before, all women and girls are more than half the Victorian population, so we know they're underrepresented in leadership roles, and we also know that participation levels are much, much lower in sport and physical activities. So this is something the Change Our Game campaign is really trying to address. And I think there's been some huge inroads made over the last few years as well. some of there's 9 recommendations that the Change Our Game program is trying to implement, and we've worked in some of these spaces too. So there's an Ambassadors of Change program, and there's trying to connect these ambassadors, so the Change Our Game ambassadors, with the local programs, and we've been lucky enough to do that in a range of ways. We had Lauren Foote come and speak to us at our Girls Summit, where we had 50 girls come to talk about sport in Gippsland, and she was absolutely fantastic. And today we're lucky enough to interview Monique Hanley as well. We've done a lot of work on gender quotas. No one really likes formal quotas or discussion about that, but I think it's been a really effective tool to educate people about how, or the need for more women on boards, how we recruit and support women to step up to leadership positions, female-friendly facilities. So GippSport does a lot of letters of support and supporting clubs to understand how to improve their facilities. And one of the other key initiatives is the Women in Sport in Media, and that's something that our local Change Our Game group, which we've called Changing Gippsland's Game, is really focusing on trying to get more media stories on the local women's sport initiatives and leaders out there too. So yeah, there's absolutely fantastic work being done, not only across Victoria, but really in Gippsland too. So it's really exciting. As an athlete, Monique had a very successful road and track cycling career. She has ridden across Canada, chased the Tour de France solo, and raced as the only female in the team that won the Race Across America in 2007, setting a new course record. Monique is a passionate advocate supporting the growth of women and girls' participation in cycling, having previously chaired Cycling Australia's Women's Commission and Cycling Victoria's Women and Girls Commission. So we're really excited to have Monique joining us today. So thank you very much. And we'll just kick off with the first question. So we understand you're returning to live in Gippsland. So what's your connection with us here?
I can't help it. It's drawing me home. So that's the short answer. The longer version is, I was born in Warragul and grew up in Yarragon on a farm, and for the last 20 or so years been loosely based in Melbourne. And my husband, as we've had to relocate for his work, he's on the outskirts of Melbourne now, and the commute across town was too long. So there were a couple of things, and we sort of made the decision back in June, but we've only been able to really make it happen now just because of all the delays of impacts with restrictions and so on. So we've only just sort of dug our heels into the Gippsland soil again, which has been really good. And the other good thing about being back is just being able to be closer to my parents. My dad isn't well at the moment, so it's just really good to be able to hang out and just normal things like listening to them argue. It's just really nice to hear that again. I'll probably regret that in a couple of weeks or so, but at the moment it's really cool.
That sounds great, Monique. Today we're talking about the Change Our Game initiative, and just wanted to know how long you've been a Change Our Game ambassador, and why do you think ambassadors and a campaign like Change Our Game are so important?
Yeah, Change Our Game there's actually been a really long lead time into the whole Change Our Game and the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation, which was an initiative of the Victorian government. It all started back in 2015 when there was an inquiry into women and girls in sport in Victoria, and one of the recommendations was to prioritise change initiatives to really make that significant change. I call it change in many social movements can be circular, and particularly in sport, there's been efforts to increase and improve participation by women and girls in sport for many years. And whenever there's been a movement, there's always been a regression. So I see this initiative, my interpretation of it, as an attempt to chock the wheel in progress, to stop the wheels coming back. And I think it's really important that they're doing it in this way, in a way that you can change policy and attitudes and culture within sport that can sustain change. And the Change Our Game ambassadors are kind of like an extension of that. So there's about 12 or 13 of us, and we all come from completely different sports. We all, I think I think all of us have been in the program since 2018. So we're into our third year of being an ambassador, and it's kind of, it's in some ways it's a little bit vague, but if I could narrow it down, it's trying to normalize the leadership of women in sport, and that it can come from a variety of different backgrounds, different sporting experiences, different skill sets, and different areas as well. So leadership from referee or officiating, leadership from a board perspective, which is kind of my background, and leadership on the field as well, leadership in coaching, leadership in administration. So just by having high profile women from across that spectrum within sport helps to normalise. So instead of us sort of championing the one woman to lead everyone, if there's many women, then yeah, it's all about normalising the concept of women as leaders.
Yeah, I really love that. And you would have also seen an increase in cycling over the last few months. So I think we get some statistics here, and the increase in both walking and cycling is phenomenal. And I guess you've been involved with the sport for a long time. And what are some of the things you've worked on to influence change?
Yes, so I totally agree that when you shut down, who would have thought that the impacts of a pandemic would really support the growth of active recreation, sort of in a non-sporting context. And I think walking and cycling, and I really hope that that's a trend that we've all of us have been in some ways forced to embrace, and all of us can probably see the value of it and hopefully continue on. But back when I first started in cycling, our membership so this is regarding Cycling Victoria, which is the state body for organised cycling in Victoria. And our membership was sort of around 10% of all of our members were female, which is, shocking when you realise how easy it is for anyone to get on a bike and ride. And once you do it, you realise how awesome it is. So there were some real structural and cultural issues within the sport that really needed challenging. And I sort of came to it heavily pregnant when I had a bit of time off the bike, and was able to dive in at a really good time when there was a movement and an appetite for change, which is it's a really important factor. You can have all the energy in the world, but if the movement isn't there, or if the resistance is locked in, it can be a futile exercise, and you can burn out. Burnout is big, and I can talk for hours about the risks of burnout. But in my time, I was able to come at a time where there was a bit of appetite for change, and so my energy was luckily channeled in a good way. And so we were able to make a number of changes. We got support from Vic Health, and to do a number of things. Also, the Department of Sport and Rec back then, to make a number of changes, not only in terms of how the sport was structured, but also from a policy perspective, the programs and initiatives we were able to run. And in doing so, we were able to change the organisational culture as well, and to shift that. So some things you can talk about all sorts of aspects of that. Some things were easy to do, and some things were quite resistant. But what I think I learned from that time is that, there's lots of lessons from that, but I think one is that even though we were a small cycling body in the big world of cycling, what we were able to achieve, other cycling bodies were able to look back on and reflect on our ability to change. So it didn't matter how small you are in the big scheme of things, your ability to change can still have a trickle up effect, if you like, and can really inspire other organisations, other associations, and other geographies to look on us, and to be inspired by those actions. So that was a big lesson for me. So I guess some of the changes we were able to bring in had an impact on participation levels. So we saw year-on-year change of membership increase that actually increased the share of overall female members, which meant in a sport like cycling that was already increasing in popularity, we were really showing really strong signs of membership growth from the women. So that was outgrowing that of the men, which was fantastic to see that balance. We were able to change the constitution in terms of supporting the governance of the sport to ensure that women were always factored in. So we actually changed the constitution change required at least 40% representation on the board to be of either gender. So in a male-dominated sport like cycling, that meant minimum 40% of the board was women, and that was embedded in the constitution, not a nice to have, but locked in. So that was a really great outcome. We also made policy changes to challenge some of the stereotypes in the sport of cycling. So one of the things was podium girls, which you might see in big events like the Tour de France and other big cycling events. We banned those almost 10 years ago now, and those little things were just important public relation shifts to change the perceptions of cycling that it was just a bloke's world. So those are minor changes, but that was helping to shift the cultural attitudes within the sport. And then there were other things that made a lot of sense to us that that the institutional body still has a resistance to. So things like equal prize money, we brought in 2013, and just even recently on Twitter, there's a very large cycling event held on the past weekend where the women's prize for the winner of the race was 7% of the men's prize for winning that race. So internationally, there is huge discrepancies within the sport. But here in Victoria, it's been equalised and normalised, which is really important because it helps shift those attitudes and it has a flow-on effect. So everyone in Victoria doesn't think twice about equality in cycling. So those things are, really important shifts that help start the attitude changes within the sport that continue to have flow-on effects.
Absolutely, that sounds great. Another one from me, Monique. I believe that you're studying at the moment. Can
Yeah.
you perhaps tell us a little bit about that and how you think this research will assist in improving gender equality?
Yeah, so I've gone back to study just for a bit of fun. I'm doing a PhD program at Victoria University, and my interest is looking into gender equity investments in sport. I particularly want to look at it I want to see how the money is invested and what is the most effective way to invest money. If you look at it from a public purse perspective, as taxpayers, we want to see money used effectively. So it's interesting that there hasn't been a lot of study on the best way to spend money that enables change and change for the better in terms of gender equality and inclusion in sport. So that's my particular focus area. I'm just in the beginning of that journey. I'm only a couple of months in. So it's already coming up some really interesting questions and reflections to look into, and I'm really excited about the journey. But in terms of its relevance, I actually think it's really relevant in terms of how governments invest in change, and also how we can be sustainable in change as well. So I'm hoping that as a result of this, we can look at making sure there's not a unending supply of money for these things. So if let's make sure that whatever we're spending, we're doing it in the most effective way.
That is really exciting, and I look forward to following you on that journey and learning about what you find out and seeing what impact that might have in the longer term as well. So, as you know, we have our localised community leadership program, which is being funded through Change Our Game, which is really exciting. And for our local Gippsland women who are trying to bring bring about change in their local club or their sport, what's one piece of advice that you would like to give them?
Oh, where do you begin? I think reflecting on this, I think it's about there's so much to change, and for particular sports, sometimes the change journey can be just overwhelming. There's so much to do, and that can be a real risk when you bring a lot of passion into the space, because the risk is that you take on much of that change journey, and you do it because you're committed, because you want to see the outcome. So the challenge is, how can you direct that energy, the passion that you have, to be the most effective, and to do it in a way that you don't burn out. So we've seen, and even in my relatively short time in the sport, so I'd probably say sort of the last 15, 20 years or so, you've seen, I can see track people who've come in with strong passions and then have burnt out because it's just so hard to shift or change things. And so that would be my sort of not a recommendation, but just something to be really mindful of, that that change is hard. It's great to come in all guns blazing, but it's a long, slow process. And so one of the things that helped protected me from burning out was setting up a committee. So in cycling, we call them commissions. So we had the Women and Girls Commissions in Victoria, and of course the Women's Commission for Cycling Australia. And in that way, it was just a really good way to balance out the passion, but also to come at it and combine energies of other like-minded people. And I think there's so much you can draw on from other passionate people in this space. And in some ways, we do that from an ambassador perspective as well. As ambassadors, we occasionally get that opportunity to come together, and it's really inspiring just to see the energy of all the work everyone else is doing in this space. And I know GippSport does that as well. It facilitates the women leaders, and I can't underestimate how powerful that is, and how important it is to have that group to lean on, to be able to vent on frustrations, but to also draw energy from. So that's one thing in terms of energy management, but it also helps with being strategic as well. So you can get everyone focusing on the one thing and making sure that you can work together and tick off those goals on that journey. I talk about change as a journey, and it is a journey. It's a journey, and it's circular, and you've got to chock the wheels. So think of it as a caravan, and climbing long hills. You've got to make sure that you can chock the wheel when you need a break, but to always find that energy to keep plugging on there. So that's my big thing. And the other important thing is that sport is traditionally, and I know it's changing, but it still remains a structure and a culture that has been male dominated. And I think we can all still accept that those foundations, those historical foundations, are still current through to today. So some of the challenges of change is to try and change those embedded attitudes in those leaders who are still male, and in the men within the sporting club as well. So if you're a woman coming in and pushing a strong change agenda, it's really difficult, but it's really nuanced that you bring the men along on that journey, and that's sometimes really hard if the resistance is there. And we're all volunteers, so I can see, someone comes up and says we've got to do things differently. As a volunteer, that's a really hard thing to grapple with. So I get that. I get how hard that is to go, but I've always done this. I've always done it this way, and this is my volunteer. I give my time freely for this sport, and you're telling me to change how I give my time. It's a really hard thing. It's a really hard conversation, and a really hard habit changing thing to go through. But it's also really important. So it's just something I think you just need to be really mindful of and sensitive about. That change is really hard. It's hard for everyone, but it's also really important. So that's my big worldly advice on that. Yeah, just to be reflective that it's it's hard for everyone, even though you might see it to be a black and white change that needs to be made, that it's underneath it all. It can be quite difficult for someone, again, who's been around your sport, who might be a life member, might have they've come through as a child, their parents were involved in the sport, and asking them to think about that sport in a different way. It's a really hard thing at times for some people, but it's also important.
It sure is, and there's some really good advice, I think, to part to our listening audience. I think there is still a lot of inroads to make, but definitely on the right path, I think, for making sure we have equitable sports clubs for both males and females. So just wanted to thank you again, Monique, for appearing on our show today. It's been really good to have a chat with you, and we appreciate you giving your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me. And if you want to find out more about the Change Our Game, you can check out, they're on Twitter at Change Our Game. It's very easy to remember. They're also on Facebook as well. And there's heaps of programs in terms of scholarship opportunities and development opportunities for women. Change Our Game program is always rolling out initiatives to support women in sport. So make sure you follow along and throw your hat in the ring for the next round.
Michelle, this has been a great discussion. If people would like to know more about the GippSport work in this space, how can they do this?
We've got a couple of different ways. So we've talked a lot about our Change Our Game work. So on our GippSport website, we have a page that focuses on gender equality, and all of our Change Our Game initiatives are found on that page. So you can check that out there. The GippSport forum, which is also on our website, has a Changing Gippsland's Games section, which has specific resources and discussion in a closed group for women working in community sport who would like to access some support or advice or resources. So you can check that out on our GippSport website. And the other program that we haven't touched on too much today, which is also a passion or something that I get really excited about, is our Gippy Girls Can program, which is a local amplification of the Victorian This Girl Can campaign. And what we're doing at the moment is this program's been going for a couple of years, and we really want to talk with local Gippsland women about if they've been involved in the past or if they've been following the social media, what they think about it, how could we improve it. And also now as returning to programming, what types of things might they like to participate in, or even if there's some events or some different types of support they might need on their physical activity journey. I know coming out of COVID, we've been some bike riding and walking, and we're talking about maybe some bike education courses or things like that in 2021. Looking forward to having some really fantastic programs that will really get everyone excited and fit and active and healthy.
Oh, that all sounds great. So we're going to finish it there, and that's a wrap, everyone. Thanks again to Monique for joining us today. Until our next episode, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
For more information on Between Games, visit www.gippsport.com.au. Between Games is supported by Vic Health and the Department of Health and Human Services. GippSport, supporting community sport.